A K9 German Shepherd puppy and a wild bobcat were never meant to meet. What happened will touch your heart. He was barely 8 weeks old. A K9 German Shepherd puppy bred for strength, obedience, and duty. She was wild. A young bobcat, fierce and free, born in the shadows of the forest with no interest in humans. They never should have crossed paths. One belonged to law enforcement, the other to the wild. But when fate brought them face to face, what happened wasn't a fight. It was something no one could predict it. This story will challenge everything you think you know about instincts, trust, and the powerful bond that can form between species that were never meant to understand each other. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more real, emotional stories like this one straight to your screen. Are you ready for one of the most unexpected friendships ever witnessed? Let's begin. The forest was too quiet. Officer Daniel Blake had been AK-9 handler with the Summit County Sheriff's Department for 11 years, and he knew silence in the woods didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant something was watching. The sun was just rising over the Utah mountains. Mist clung to the tree trunks, and the air smelled of wet pine and snowmelt. Daniel was miles from the nearest road, hiking a trail used mostly by local rangers and the occasional lost hiker. But today, he wasn't searching for anyone. He was delivering hope. Inside the black canvas carrier slung over his shoulder was a sleeping German Shepherd pup, 8 weeks old, healthy, alert, and already showing signs of instinctual awareness. His name was Ranger. Daniel had named him after his former partner, the one he'd buried 6 months ago, after a search and rescue operation went horribly wrong in a flooded canyon. Losing his K9 had taken a toll on Daniel that no therapy session or departmental briefing could fix. So he was finally offered a new pup for training. Something in him resisted. He didn't want a replacement. But this puppy wasn't meant to replace anyone. He was meant to start over. Daniel had decided to bring Ranger out for his first scent tracking exercise that morning. No distractions. No city noise. Just the trees, the trail, and the young dog's sense of smell. But something felt off. Ranger, usually restless and wriggling, was frozen inside the carrier. His tiny body stiffened, nose twitching, ears pinned back. Daniel stopped walking. "What is it, buddy?" He set the carrier down slowly and opened the flap. Ranger didn't leap out. He stayed low, almost crawling forward as he sniffed the air. Then he growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fierce. But it was real. Daniel squinted into the woods. Movement, just beyond the fog line. At first, it looked like a large fox. Then the ears twitched wide and pointed. The body moved lower, more feline than canine. And the tail, short with a black tip. A bobcat. Daniel instinctively reached for his sidearm, but paused. It was small, young, maybe 5 or 6 months old. Likely lost or separated from its mother, and it was staring directly at Ranger. Not at Daniel, not at the bag, not at the trees, just at the pup. Ranger stepped forward. The bobcat didn't move. "Easy, Ranger," Daniel whispered. But the pup didn't seem afraid. His tail stayed low but wagged once, a subtle, cautious gesture. He took another step. The bobcat stood its ground. Daniel didn't breathe. Another step. Then another. Ranger was now just 10 feet away. Suddenly, the bobcat lowered itself completely to the ground. Daniel flinched, but it didn't pounce. It crawled forward, belly low, like a cub seeking warmth. When it stopped, it let out a strange sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a cry. Almost a plea. Ranger sat down. And then, to Daniel's disbelief, the bobcat nudged its head against Ranger's tiny shoulder. Not violently. Gently. Like a sibling. Daniel blinked hard, unsure if he was hallucinating from lack of sleep or if nature was simply rewriting its own rules in front of him. Ranger responded by licking the side of the bobcat's face. That broke Daniel. He lowered his weapon, heart pounding. Whatever was happening, it wasn't danger. It was something else. Something deeper. He took a slow step closer. The bobcat flinched but didn't run. Daniel crouched. "Hey, I don't know where you came from, but this little guy's not your enemy." He wasn't sure if he was talking to the bobcat or himself. The two young animals sat together, pressed lightly side by side. That's when Daniel noticed something. The bobcat was injured, its front paw swollen, twisted slightly inward, and worse. Its fur was matted in one spot near the ribs, blood. Fresh, but not actively bleeding. Ranger stood up and circled once around the wildcat, then let out a high-pitched whimper, looking back at Daniel. It wasn't fear. It was a call for help. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew better than to touch a wild bobcat, even a juvenile. But it was clear. The cat wasn't aggressive. It wasn't feral. It was in pain. And Ranger, he wasn't leaving it behind. Daniel sighed. You've got to be kidding me. Still, slowly, carefully, he removed his jacket, stepped forward inch by inch, and laid it beside the bobcat. The animal didn't move. Okay, he murmured. Okay, you win. Let's try this your way. He bundled the cat gently, wrapping the swollen paw, keeping its face exposed. Ranger walked beside them as Daniel lifted the animal into his arms, careful not to jostle the injury. He turned and began hiking back, now with two small lives in his care. Ranger, he said, breathless, you weren't bred for this, but maybe this is what you were born to do. As the trees closed in behind them, and the sound of wind replaced the stillness, Daniel didn't know what came next. If the bobcat would survive, if the department would even allow him to keep Ranger after what just happened. All he knew was this. The pup had made a choice. He had chosen compassion over instinct, connection over fear. And that choice had changed everything. The wind had picked up as Daniel emerged from the forest, carrying a bundled bobcat against his chest and with Ranger trotting dutifully at his side. They were nearly 2 hours from the nearest paved road, and Daniel had to hike carefully to avoid jarring the injured animal. Despite the weight and awkwardness of carrying a wild feline, he didn't stop. Not once. Ranger kept looking up at the bobcat, whose eyes fluttered between open and closed, and let out quiet, rhythmic whines as if trying to reassure the creature it wasn't alone. By the time they reached the SUV, Daniel was sweating through his flannel, and adrenaline was beginning to crash through his bloodstream. He laid the bobcat gently across the back seat, tucked into his jacket, and secured the door. Ranger hopped into the front passenger seat and sat, alert, staring backward as if guarding his new companion. Daniel started the engine, muttering, "This better not be the dumbest thing I've ever done." The closest emergency vet was Dr. Celia Morse, an experienced wildlife specialist who ran a private practice on the edge of Summit County. Daniel had worked with her before, mostly when deer or coyotes got tangled near town. She was brilliant and blunt. He drove like a man possessed. By the time he skidded into the gravel driveway outside Celia's cabin clinic, she was already opening the door in scrubs, squinting. "You didn't call," she began. Daniel stepped out. "I brought you a patient. 2, actually." She froze when he opened the back door. "You brought me a lynx?" "Bobcat," he corrected. "Young. Wounded." She looked from the cat to Ranger, who barked once and tilted his head. "Did the dog do it?" "No. The dog found it." She blinked. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Celia motioned him inside. The clinic was warm and dimly lit, with blankets, medical tools, and makeshift exam tables lined with newspaper. Daniel laid the bobcat down as Celia put on gloves and began examining it. Swollen paw, minor punctures on the flank. Looks like a fight with another predator. She's lucky to be alive. Celia nodded. "Yep, female." Daniel looked at Ranger, who now sat near the wall, eyes locked on the table. The bobcat stirred, let out a low growl, but didn't lash out. "She doesn't seem afraid of him," Celia observed. "That's because she's not." Celia shot him a look. "Daniel, this is not a Disney movie." "I know, but I saw them interact. It wasn't aggression. It was something else. I think she was drawn to him. Or maybe she thought he was like her, or she thought he was a bobcat. She thought he was alone." Celia sighed. "You're out of your mind." "I know, but it's working." Celia administered a mild sedative, cleaned the wounds, and wrapped the paw. Ranger stood the entire time, tail low, but never growled. once the Bobcat was stable. Celia placed her in a soft recovery crate beside the heater. Ranger laid down outside the crate, resting his head on his paws, and refused to leave. Celia folded her arms. "You're not just here for treatment, are you?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I need to know if there's any legal issue with what I just did." "Oh, you mean bringing protected wild animal out of the forest without alerting fish and wildlife?" "Yeah, that." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "If someone wanted to make noise, you could be fined. But I doubt it'll come to that." He exhaled. Celia added, "Unless you try to keep her." Daniel frowned. "What if she can't go back?" "Then she'll be relocated. Rehabbed, maybe transferred to sanctuary. But not kept. She's wild." He looked down at Ranger, who was now pressed against the crate. "He doesn't think she's wild. Dogs don't get a vote." Daniel didn't respond. His mind was elsewhere, back in the forest, in that moment when Ranger sat beside the cat, like they were littermates split by species. "She needs a name," he murmured. Celia arched an eyebrow. "You're naming her now? She's got to be called something, even if it's temporary." He knelt beside the crate. The Bobcat's eyes fluttered half open. She watched him without blinking. "She's small," Daniel whispered, "but strong. You saw how she didn't fight me when I picked her up. She trusted me." Ranger gave a soft bark. Celia sighed. "You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you?" "I'm not keeping her. I'm honoring her." After a pause, he whispered, "Let's call her Juniper." Celia made a face. "After the trees in that clearing." He added. She shrugged. "I've heard worse." That night, Daniel didn't go home. He slept on the cot in Celia's back office, with Ranger curled up at his feet. He woke several times to check on Juniper. Each time, Ranger was there, silently watching her through the mesh of the crate. At sunrise, something remarkable happened. As Celia refilled Juniper's water dish and adjusted the crate door, she stepped away for just a second too long. Juniper nudged the latch with her paw. It clicked. She stepped out. Daniel bolted upright. Ranger lifted his head, ears high, but Juniper didn't flee. She padded across the floor, favoring her injured leg, and settled down beside Ranger. The two lay there, touching, not aggressively, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Comfort, recognition. Celia whispered, "I don't believe this." Daniel whispered back, "I do." But that morning, an unmarked government SUV rolled into the driveway. Daniel's heart dropped. Celia stood at the door, stiff. A man in khakis and a state-issued wildlife badge stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Daniel Blake." "Yes." "I understand you removed a juvenile bobcat from federal land yesterday. We need to speak." Behind Daniel, Juniper looked up. Ranger rose, his body tense. The man looked at the two animals, then back at Daniel. "You're aware that under Code Section 71.3, interference with wildlife is a criminal offense?" Daniel stepped forward. "I didn't interfere," he said. "I intervened." The officer didn't look impressed. "We'll see about that." The man from Fish and Wildlife introduced himself as Agent Travis Nolan. He was calm, precise, and uninterested in pleasantries. "We received a report from a hiking drone patrol," he explained as he flipped through his clipboard. "They recorded what appeared to be a human male carrying a juvenile bobcat through the national forest." "That's you." Daniel didn't deny it. He simply said, "The animal was injured. I couldn't leave her there to die." Agent Nolan didn't respond. Instead, he glanced inside the clinic, where Juniper lay curled on a blanket, her paw freshly bandaged, Ranger lying inches from her, ears perked but tail relaxed. "Unusual behavior," the agent muttered. "She trusts him," Celia said from behind Daniel. "That's not the point," Nolan snapped. "The law doesn't operate on interspecies friendship." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it should." The agent looked at him, stone-faced. "Be that as it may, the bobcat is a protected species. She will be relocated to a licensed wildlife rehabilitation center within 48 hours. "No!" Ranger barked, a sharp, clear sound that made everyone in the room go still. Juniper stirred. She pressed her head against Ranger's side. Daniel stepped forward. With all due respect, sir, she's not ready. The paw is still healing, and any sudden stress. She will be sedated. She doesn't need sedation, Daniel argued. She needs stability. And they are not family, the agent interrupted. They are predator and predator. Whatever this anomaly is, it's temporary. It's not nature. Celia stepped in. You're wrong. I've seen trauma responses in wild animals. Juniper is bonding because she recognizes security. Safety. If you remove that abruptly, you risk complete regression. Nolan remained unfazed. Regardless, the law is the law. You have until tomorrow morning to prepare the animal. And do not interfere, or you'll be charged. He turned on his heel and left without another word. Daniel stood in silence, heart pounding. He had faced violent fugitives, drug raids, wildfires, but he had never felt as helpless as he did in that moment. Celia rested a hand on his arm. You know this was coming. She doesn't, he said, glancing at Ranger. Neither of them do. That night, the clinic felt different. Cold, final, like a countdown had begun. Daniel didn't sleep. He stayed near Juniper's crate, watching her chest rise and fall. Ranger never left her side. At one point, Juniper stirred and stood up shakily. She limped to the edge of the crate, nudged the door with her nose, and gave a soft growl. Not hostile, just confused. Ranger responded with a low whimper, as if to say, I don't understand either. Daniel whispered to them, She's not a threat. She's not a case file. She's a soul. At sunrise, Daniel walked outside to clear his head. That's when he heard the scream. Celia's voice. He bolted inside. Juniper was gone. The crate was open. Ranger was standing alert, tail stiff, ears pinned. She chewed through the mesh. Celia gasped. She's out. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and Ranger's emergency harness. Let's go. Ranger darted out ahead of him, nose to the ground. They followed the trail through the woods behind the clinic, not far from where Daniel had first found her. The prints were uneven. Her paw still hurt, but the direction was clear, uphill. Ranger barked once and veered left. Daniel followed. 15 minutes into the chase, they found her, cornered near a steep ridge, her flank heaving, eyes wild. She was scared, not aggressive, but trapped. And then Daniel saw what had startled her. A black bear, young but agitated, likely foraging early spring roots, and now standing between Juniper and her return path. The bear growled, shifting its weight. Ranger bolted. Ranger, no! But it was too late. The puppy launched forward, placing himself between Juniper and the bear, teeth bared. He didn't bark. He didn't snap. He stood his ground. The bear reared. Daniel raised his arms, shouting, H-E-Y, go, move. The bear hesitated, then snorted, and after a long pause, turned and lumbered off into the trees. Juniper collapsed to the ground. Ranger ran to her, nudging her side with his nose. Daniel reached them seconds later, breathless. You stupid, brave little idiot, he whispered, gathering them both. Back at the clinic, Celia wrapped Juniper's paw again and gave her fluids. Ranger sat with his chin on the table, watching every movement. Daniel sat in the corner, shaking. I saw it, he said. Celia turned. Saw what? The choice. Ranger didn't hesitate. He saw danger and shielded her, like she was his. She looked at him. And what do we do with that? Daniel stared at the two animals. We fight. The next morning, Agent Nolan returned with 2 wildlife officers and a transport crate. Celia met them at the door. She's not going. Nolan frowned. You have no legal grounds to deny. Daniel stepped out holding a folder. Actually, we do. Nolan looked down at the folder. What's this? A request for an emergency behavioral evaluation, signed by a licensed wildlife vet. Under Section 12.6b, if the animal demonstrates unique non-aggressive cohabitation behaviors, especially in a cross-species capacity, It may qualify for continued observation under supervised bonding. That law is outdated, Nolan muttered. But it still exists, Celia snapped. And I filed it last night. Nolan was silent. Daniel added, if you force her into that crate today, you're not just removing a wild animal. You're breaking a bond that may never be replicated. What happened between them isn't random. It's real, and we're going to prove it. Nolan stared at him, then at Ranger, then at Juniper, who stood shakily and walked to Ranger's side. They sat together, quiet, unmoving, side by side, and for a moment, even Nolan hesitated. You have 1 week, he said. Then we'll see. The news got out faster than Daniel expected. By the next morning, someone, probably a staffer from the wildlife office, had leaked a photo. AK-9 German Shepherd puppy curled beside a wild bobcat on a clinic floor. The internet did what the internet always did. It exploded. Some headlines called it a miracle. Others called it dangerous. One post on a local blog read, Sheriff's K9 trainer hides wild bobcat cub, claims it's best friends with a police dog. The comments were worse. Daniel didn't care about public opinion, but what he did care about was Juniper and what the attention was doing to her. Over the next 2 days, she became restless. The quiet peace she'd found beside Ranger began to crack. She paced in her crate. She hissed when Celia tried to clean her bandages, and she stopped eating unless Ranger was in a room with her. She's overstimulated, Celia said on the 3rd morning, arms crossed. No, Daniel replied. She's scared. She knows something's changing. She's an animal, Daniel. She's not psychic. She's not just an animal. Celia didn't argue, but her silence said enough. Meanwhile, Agent Nolan returned with reinforcements. This time he wasn't alone. He brought a federal wildlife behaviorist named Dr. Karen Linsdale, flown in from Montana. She was sharp-eyed, with white hair in a tight braid and a folder full of forms. Her job: assess whether Juniper could legally remain under observation at the clinic, or she should be relocated to a sanctuary. I'm not here to attack anyone, she said in her first meeting with Daniel and Celia. But I do need objective data. Feelings aren't evidence. Daniel bristled. What do you need? Behavioral consistency. Responses under stress. Evidence of non-instinctive interspecies bonding. Not just proximity, but preference communication and co-regulation. Celia muttered, You want to see if they actually care about each other? Dr. Linsdale nodded. Exactly. So for 3 days, she ran tests. She watched as Ranger was let out of the room, leaving Juniper alone. The bobcat paced, cried, clawed at the edge of her crate. Her anxiety spiked. Then she brought Ranger back in, and Juniper calmed instantly. Her breathing slowed. She laid down beside the crate wall, resting her head against the mesh. They switched it. Juniper was moved to another room. Ranger sat by the door and refused to eat. When Juniper was returned, he barked softly and licked the latch on her crate. Linsdale took notes the entire time. At the end of day 3, she held a meeting in Celia's office. I've never seen anything quite like this, she said. But I won't lie. This will be controversial. Daniel sat forward. So you agree there's a real bond? I believe there's evidence of co-regulation and imprinting. Yes, I believe they formed a surrogate sibling dynamic. Daniel's chest lifted. But, she continued, that's not a permanent solution. Eventually, Juniper will mature. She'll grow stronger. Her instincts may shift, and that could pose a threat to the dog and to any human near her. She's not dangerous, Daniel argued. She's not yet, Linsdale said gently. But that's not the same as never will be. Then what do we do? Celia asked. Do we wait until she bites someone and then take her away? Dr. Linsdale looked at Daniel. I want to try something. One last evaluation. Not in a crate. Not in a clinic. Outside. A natural space. With both of them. Daniel blinked. You mean let her go? No. Let her be watched. Safely. Controlled space. No fences. Just the 2 of them. Daniel hesitated. If she runs... She won't, Linsdale said. But if she does, you'll have your answer. The next morning, just after sunrise, Daniel drove them all to a private patch of forest, 14 acres leased by the county for training purposes. It had cliffs, streams, and open glades, all under camera surveillance. Ranger wore a soft vest with GPS tag. Juniper had one sewn into a collar, temporary, gentle, and secure. Daniel opened the back hatch. Juniper leapt out first. She froze, looked left, then right, body tense. Ranger followed. He walked up beside her and paused. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Juniper stepped forward, and Ranger matched her stride. They disappeared into the trees. Daniel watched the screen from the monitor van. A small drone tracked them from above. The two animals walked together, stopping at the same bush, sniffing the same rock. Juniper climbed a low boulder, and Ranger sat at the base, waiting for her to jump down. "They're pacing each other," Linsdale said. 2 hours passed. Then something unexpected happened. Juniper began to move faster. She broke into a slow run, then a sprint. Ranger barked and chased after her. Daniel's heart stopped. "They're just playing," Celia whispered. But Daniel didn't move. Juniper was now at the edge of the clearing. And then she stopped. She turned around and walked back to Ranger. The drone caught it all. Her nuzzling his face, him licking her ear, both of them lying down beneath a tree, touching, resting, watching the wind move through the pines. Dr. Linsdale closed her notebook. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. "You just might win this." But before Daniel could exhale, the radio on the desk buzzed. "Dr. Linsdale, we've got a problem." "What is it?" she asked. The voice on the other end replied. "Fish and Wildlife Headquarters just received a court order. They're bypassing your evaluation. A transport team is already en route to seize the animal." Daniel stood. "You said I had time." Linsdale's voice was low. Someone overrode the process. "Who?" But she already knew. Agent Nolan. He wasn't waiting for evidence. He was coming to end it. And this time, Daniel wouldn't let him. They came in 3 black trucks with tinted windows and government plates. Daniel heard the engines before he saw them. Low, steady, and deliberate, like the opening notes of a song that only ends in silence. Ranger sensed it first. He lifted his head from Juniper's side, ears stiffening, tail rigid. Juniper stirred. She was lying under a cedar tree beside the training field, curled beside Ranger after hours of quiet companionship, the last piece they would know for a while. Celia and Dr. Linsdale were inside the mobile field unit, monitoring the final behavior footage. Daniel stood outside, watching the dust rise on the forest road as the trucks approached. At the front, Agent Nolan. Again, behind him, 2 uniformed wildlife control officers and a transport specialist carrying a reinforced crate. He didn't waste time. "You were warned," he said as he stepped from the vehicle. Dr. Linsdale stepped forward. "The evaluation is still in progress." "Not anymore," Nolan replied, holding up the court order, signed last night by the regional director. "They're seizing the animal." Celia's face paled. "Without considering the evidence?" "There's been enough media noise already," Nolan snapped. "The agency's priority is containment, not viral sympathy campaigns." Daniel took a breath and moved in front of the open path. "You're not taking her." "You don't have that authority," Nolan said flatly. "I do have custody," Daniel replied. "I was named temporary guardian under state Veterinary Code 14.9. That's still valid." "For another 6 hours," Nolan growled. "And I have federal jurisdiction now." Juniper and Ranger stood together in the grass about 20 yards away. Ranger was alert but unmoving. Juniper's golden eyes were wide, focused, watching. She sensed the tension, the shift in posture, the standoff between Daniel and the strangers who had no scent of kindness. "She'll panic," Daniel warned. "If you rush her, she'll bolt." "That's why we'll sedate her," said the officer behind Nolan, preparing a tranquilizer rifle. Daniel stepped in front of him. "That's not happening." "You interfere," Nolan said coldly, "and you'll be arrested for obstruction of federal wildlife operations." Dr. Linsdale looked at Nolan, disgust in her eyes. You're not protecting animals. You're protecting your paper trail. Nolan ignored her. Stand aside, Mr. Blake. Daniel didn't move. Last chance. Then a sound behind them. A low growl. Every head turned. Juniper was standing between Daniel and the officers. Her body was tense, but not aggressive. Her ears were forward. Her legs spread slightly. She growled again, not at Ranger, not at Daniel, at Nolan. She's warning you, Celia whispered. She knows. Keep the dog back, Nolan barked. But Ranger wasn't moving. He stood next to Juniper, side by side, both watching the men. Celia stepped closer to Daniel. We can't stop this legally, but maybe she can. Daniel knelt down. He didn't call out, didn't give a command. Instead, he whispered, Juniper, if you want to go with them, I won't stop you. She blinked slowly. He continued, voice shaking. But if you want to stay, show them what choice looks like. The air held its breath. Then Juniper turned. She didn't run. She didn't crouch or hide. She walked, calmly, confidently, to Ranger's side, pressed her body against his, and laid down, together, side by side, unified. I swear to God, Nolan muttered, this is absurd. He raised his hand. The officer with the tranquilizer moved to aim. But in that moment, Celia stepped forward and snapped a photo. Flash, click, and before Nolan could say a word, she was already uploading it to the cloud, to news contacts, to every outlet that had been begging for a real-time update. You touch that animal now, she said, and the entire country will see it. Dr. Linsdale added, you'll be on camera shooting a bonded, non-aggressive animal beside a trained service dog who has not shown a single sign of threat. Nolan froze. The officer hesitated, then lowered the gun. This isn't over, Nolan said. Daniel nodded. No, it's just beginning. That night, the photo went viral. It was picked up by every major outlet. Bobcat and K9 refused to be separated. Wildlife agents backed down. Comments flooded in. Animal rights organizations launched petitions. Law enforcement K9 groups weighed in. Veterans who had worked with military dogs wrote letters of support, describing their animals' ability to detect emotion, to choose companionship across species, and fear. By sunrise, the regional director had rescinded the removal order. Juniper would stay, under observation, with Daniel, and with Ranger. 2 weeks passed. Juniper's injuries healed completely. She gained weight. She purred, a sound no one expected. She nuzzled Ranger during storms. And Ranger, ever the stoic little protector, took to lying in front of her crate at night like a sentry. But the question remained, what now? Daniel couldn't keep her forever. Celia, Dr. Linsdale, and several experts formed a review panel. They explored options, sanctuary programs, adaptive release, monitored long-term foster. But the wild was no longer Juniper's world. She had chosen a new pack, and it included one German shepherd and one stubborn human. Daniel stood outside the clinic one evening, watching the two play in the yard. Celia joined him. You know this isn't sustainable, right? I know, he said softly, but I also know I've never seen anything like it. She'll grow. She'll mature. And if she ever feels trapped, I'll let her go. Celia looked at him. Really? He nodded. When she's ready. But not before. Because right now she's not finished choosing. That night, Daniel wrote a letter. Not to the agency. Not to the press. To Juniper. He wrote it on real paper. Folded it. Placed it near her crate. Ranger sniffed it. Then laid beside her. And Juniper, as of understanding, placed her paw on top of it. The forest was still again, not with fear, but with peace. It had been 2 months since Juniper made her stand, since a juvenile bobcat chose not to run back into the wild, but to sit beside a German shepherd puppy and quietly defy everything people thought they knew about nature. And she never left. The court battle ended the way stories like this rarely do, with understanding. After hundreds of thousands of signatures, dozens of expert testimonies, and the undeniable bond captured in every photo and video, a federal wildlife ethics board issued a rare ruling. Juniper would remain under permanent sanctuary care. With Ranger, their environment was adapted. Daniel's training land, once used for rescue simulations, was transformed into a protected behavioral study habitat, part home. It had trees, shade, streams, and open sky, but also a soft kennel for Ranger, shaded resting dens for Juniper, and high-tech monitors quietly installed to study what no one had ever documented this closely before. Co-species companionship between predator breeds, based on voluntary emotional bonding. The research would go on for years. But Daniel didn't care about the research. He cared about the mornings. The way Juniper now stretched before sunrise, yawning with those wide feline jaws, before walking over to Ranger and bumping her head into his side. The way Ranger grumbled like an old man, rolled onto his back, and let her swat him lightly on the nose before they both bounded toward the woods like children. She never wandered too far. Sometimes she'd climb a low branch and stare out at the treetops. Other times, she'd curl in the shade while Ranger brought her sticks he refused to share with anyone else. Daniel, once emotionally wrecked from losing his previous K9 partner, found healing not in replacement, but in rebirth. He didn't try to own Juniper. He didn't train her. He didn't name her again. He simply watched, protected, and stayed. He began journaling each day, not for science, but for memory. He wrote down the day Juniper licked a wound on Ranger's ear after a tumble, the moment Ranger barked frantically at a hawk, until Juniper darted into cover, the morning they both sat by the fence, watching the sunrise, their bodies touching like littermates. That was the word Daniel kept coming back to, siblings, not by blood, but by choice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the pine trees cast long shadows across the field, Daniel sat near the fence and watched them lying together, half asleep under a cedar tree. "I never would have believed it," he whispered, "but now I wouldn't believe anything else." Celia, sitting beside him, smiled. "They're rewriting instinct." He nodded. "Or maybe they're reminding us of something older than instinct." She looked at him. "Like what?" Daniel gazed at the two of them. One bred for protection, the other born into solitude, and yet neither alone anymore. Like the ones who stay, that's what matters most. That night, Daniel left the gate open, not by accident, not for a test, just open, a gentle invitation to freedom. Juniper noticed first. She rose slowly, walked to the open edge, stared into the woods. Ranger followed but didn't bark. He just sat beside her. They stood like that for a long time, facing the wild that once held her. Daniel didn't call them, didn't move. Then Juniper turned. She looked at Ranger. He looked back, and she stepped away from the forest, back into the light, back into the home they had built together. With nothing more than trust in time, she had made her choice again, not out of fear, not because she couldn't survive alone, but because she no longer wanted to. At sunrise, she and Ranger wrestled in the dew-covered grass like they had every morning for weeks. She tackled him gently. He let her win. They rolled until both were covered in pine needles and joy. Daniel sipped his coffee and smiled. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like something was missing. Later that day, he posted a single photo on the department's community page. No press release, no dramatic caption. Just Juniper and Ranger asleep side by side, beneath the cedar tree, the setting sun painting gold across their backs. He wrote, "Not all bonds are made of blood. Some are made of being seen and never left behind." The post went viral again. But Daniel didn't care about views anymore. He cared about what happened when people stopped scrolling, when they looked at those two animals and felt something move inside them. A reminder that there is power in staying, that sometimes the fiercest love is a quiet kind, the kind that chooses you when you don't know how to ask for it. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Loyalty isn't just about following orders. It's about standing beside those who need us, even when it doesn't make sense, even when the world says that's not how it works. Love rewrites rules, and courage is sometimes found in the smallest heartbeat beside you. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in second chances and the kind of family that chooses each other. Thank you for watching.